You might notice with our previous sessions, we had a pretty definitive statement there about what we would like to see done in the legislative session, what we think needs to be done for open records, open meetings. There's a reason there's a question mark on this, because it's kind of a complicated issue. Free speech is never far from the front on college campuses, and it's become a completely front and center issue in recent years, as everyone knows. It's a time of highly partisan debate. We've had a lot of protests, social justice issues on campus, such as the Me Too movement, racial equity. We've had a lot of cases in Texas where white supremacist flyers have been posted around campus that have provoked a lot of debate on campus. Speeches have been canceled, protests have been shut down, and student newspapers across the country right now, are even more vulnerable than the rest of the media at large, and they're under attack in some cases. So we felt like this would be a great panel to bring to you all, have a really distinguished group of speakers. My name is Debbie Hyatt. I'm the editor of the Austin American Statesman. Right next to me here is Ray Bonilla. Ray leads the Office of General Counsel of the Texas A&M University System. He serves as its chief legal officer. He joined the office in September 2011. He was recognized recently for professional achievement by the Texas General Counsel Forum as the outstanding general counsel, nonprofit, or government agency. And prior to joining the Office of General Counsel, Ray he was a partner in the law firm of Ray, Wood, and Bonilla in Austin, has served as general counsel at the Texas Comptroller's Office, and has been on the Washington staff of former U.S. Senator Lloyd Benson, has also worked at the law firms of McGinnis, Lockridge, and Kilgore, and Baker and Botts. And right next to Ray, we have Laura Jett Krantz, who is a lecturer as well as director and faculty advisor at my alma mater, Texas State University. She's a faculty advisor of the student media organization, the University Star, a paper I have very fond feelings for from my time a long time ago. She's been advising student media for 12 years. Before that, Laura was a reporter and editor for community newspapers in Oklahoma and Texas. She spent some time as communications director for the city of Tyler, Texas, and then took on the role of department chair of journalism and student publications at Tyler Junior College before coming to Texas State just last year. She's a past president of the Texas Intercollegiate Press Association, which you all may know is really critical in student media and making sure that students get the right level of training, and also in some open records, open meetings type issues. And then right next to Laura is Leo Barnes. Leo Barnes has been the interim vice president for legal affairs at the University of Texas since the beginning of this month, I believe. As interim vice president, he has responsibility for all of the university's legal affairs, serves as the chief legal officer and general counsel and chief ethics officer. He is also, this is something we're familiar with in newsrooms, where we have this title, and this title. He is, prior to becoming the vice president for legal affairs, he was also, has been serving as the chief compliance officer, and he is still doing that. And then he has been with the university as well as an associate vice president in the past, worked for a number of years in the UT system as an associate vice, as an attorney in the Office of General Counsel, and has also been in private practice across the state in different roles. And then our final panelist here is Quinicia Frazier. She is a senior at Tarleton State University. I'm really happy to have a student on this panel. She's studying communications with an emphasis on journalism and broadcasting. She had an internship with CBS News in New York City, just finished that, and moved straight into an internship here in Austin with KVUE, which is a great place for her to be. She's heavily involved with the student newspaper and television station at Tarleton State, where she recently reported about a popular history professor who was accused of some inappropriate behavior, and she'll be talking about that as well. So really we've got a few different issues at play here. What I want to do is have each of the panelists kind of talk a little bit about the issues that are front and center, have been front and center for them regarding free speech on their campus first. And Ray, maybe we could start with you. As everybody knows, Texas A&M has had a couple of instances in recent years where a group of white supremacists have wanted to come on campus. In December of 2016, Richard Spencer made a controversial visit, and there was a lot of debate on campus about that. There was a lot of protests, counter-protests. There was some counter-programming by the students to take the attention away from Spencer. And then, about a year later, after the events in Charlottesville, a group was back going to Texas A&M with the idea of having a White Lives Matter rally. This time, the response was really different. What can you tell us about how that issue evolved for you all?
Sure. Thank you, Debbie. Yes, so as Debbie mentioned, in December of 2016, actually November, I don't remember the exact date, it was mid-November of 16, so about 10 days or so after the presidential election, a local member of the Bryan College Station community, issued a press release announcing that he had invited Richard Spencer to come speak on the A&M campus. And he was able to do so because at that time our rules, our policies allowed members of the community that were not affiliated with the university to reserve space in our facilities for meetings or events. Those of you familiar with Bryan College Station probably know that Texas A&M is the biggest show in town. It's a relatively small community, but we have very nice facilities, and our practice has always been to make those facilities available to community nonprofit groups for their meetings, their events, on a as available basis. If the student groups or the university itself is not using the facilities, they were available to members of the public. That's why this person had been able to reserve the room. It was not a student group. It wasn't the university that had invited Spencer. It was a member of the community. And so, as you might imagine, there was a flurry of activity when this was announced. Alumni, parents, students, faculty were all demanding that we not allow this to happen, that we cancel it. In my office, I immediately started getting questions about, what can we do? How can we cancel it? And the law in this area is pretty clear. Yes, we could cancel it, and they would sue us, and we would lose, and we would pay their attorney's fees and court costs, and he would come, a month or two later. So it was not, that was obviously not the way to proceed. So instead, the university, we had about 3 weeks from the time it was announced to the date of the event, with Thanksgiving in between. Emotions running pretty high. I'll remind folks that at that time, this is right after Spencer was all over the national news at an event in D.C. Given the Hail Trump salute, and so there were a lot of controversy surrounding him and his followers. And so we had to take steps to quickly put together a team to plan for the event, kind of get the word out to our university community that, we don't support the message, we don't, share his beliefs, it's inconsistent with, Aggie values, but we're constrained to permit the event to go forward. And I think one of the smartest things that President Young and his team did was they put in motion a counter event. So the same time that Richard Spencer was speaking at our Memorial Student Center, there was an Aggies United event where folks were making it very clear that they did not agree with him nor his belief. There were 400 people at the Spencer event. There were 5,000 or 6,000 at the Aggies United event. We think that the optics of that were pretty darn good. But, the fact of the matter is that we, under First Amendment law, was clear we didn't have a choice but to allow the event to proceed. And we had all these we had a tremendous security plan, security presence. I think we had about 250 law enforcement officers there. We had crowds trying to, get into the room. We had to kind of keep the room manageable. We had crowds outside trying to get into the Memorial Student Center. We had some Antifa folks with the black clothing and the masks that showed up. Were trying to stir up the crowd, and I think the law enforcement did a great job that evening. It did not devolve as it has devolved at other campuses, and we got through the evening without great incident. There were few arrests. There were no major injuries. We had to spend some significant money on security, but beyond that, we think it turned out about as well as it could have for Texas A&M. You fast forward a year, as Debbie mentioned, and right after Charlottesville, this same person came forward and said he was inviting Spencer back to the A&M campus for a White Lives Matter rally. And gave us about 3 weeks' notice, and given the kind of high emotions after Charlottesville, the social media activity after this announcement was, off the charts. And given we consulted with law enforcement, and we didn't think that we could ensure the safety of our students, faculty, staff at another Spencer event. And so we declined it on that basis. And under the First Amendment, frankly, that's the only basis that we have for turning down such an event, is if we have legitimate public safety concerns and we were comfortable that the public safety considerations were sufficiently strong that we were compelled to cancel the event. We thought we would get sued. We didn't get sued, perhaps because Spencer and his allies were busy suing Auburn and Michigan State and Penn State and Florida, and so they just decided to focus their efforts elsewhere, and we're happy about that.
So Charlottesville was also around the time when a group on the UT campus, a small mini protest, showed up with, I guess, a bunch of young men with tiki torches who were chanting, and I believe that UT dealt with those pretty swiftly because you have some guidelines regarding student sponsorship. Is that correct?
Yes, we do. And I guess one of the first things I need to say is I'm here speaking as an individual, not on behalf of the university. And in these speech issues, that's part of the concern sometimes, is it's hard to figure out who is speaking. Who are we hearing from? So our students, I wasn't involved in addressing that particular incident, but as a general rule, our students have rights under our speech policy, speech and assembly, to invite invited guests as speakers to their groups. What they do not have the authority to do is then somehow declare, all comers in the community come to see the speaker. It's intended for their group, their approved registered group, to be able to have those kind of dialogues with individuals they'd like to hear from, but it does not allow them to, in effect, put on a university-wide event to outside speakers that the university itself has not invited. So that is one of the ways we try to address that.
So what does that mean in terms of spontaneous protest? There are obviously cases where students have very strong feelings about an issue that's important to them that, things might spontaneously come up.
And that's acceptable. If you've ever walked down the West Mall on UT's campus, a lot of protest and activity and speech activity and tabling going on all the time. We really just look at time, place, manner to try to control those things so that our educational mission still remains paramount, and so classes aren't disrupted, so egress and ingress to buildings is not interfered with. But within those general constraints of time, place, manner, and of course there's some places you shouldn't have a lot of speech activity, like a library or something. But on the outside of the campus, we don't have any zones or anything like that. It really centers around, are you interfering with the ongoing activity of the university? Are you blocking access? Are you things like that. But generally speaking, a spontaneous protest or whatever it might be is something that within certain bounds, we certainly have.
And is that the same case on the A&M University campuses?
Yes, I think we're a little bit different. You know, our campus is very different from UT Austin's campus. I mean, we have 5,000 acres. It's a huge area. It's not as compact, and the city streets are not, you know, right up on the edge of campus like they are here in Austin. And so the outside areas are generally, you know, what in the case law referred to as traditional public forums. So you don't have to have a permit or, you know, permission from the university to engage in expressive activity there. You know, we only get involved in terms of only student groups or only university groups permitted to use or engage in the activity if they want to reserve a room. And we're talking about in our MS Student Center or our Rudder Auditorium, or when you get into the use of facilities, that's when those kinds of rules come into place
Okay.
at A&M. And beyond that, outdoors, as long as they're not blocking streets, interfering with people moving around campus, you know, can't use amplifiers, loudspeakers, they're permitted to engage in activity, express themselves peacefully.
So one of the clauses that I noted with the UT guidelines is around obscenity. And so it sort of brings to question one of the more popular campus protests in the past couple years has been a protest to open carry laws where students have actually had a drive to give away sex toys to students in lieu of carrying guns on campus. What sort of reaction have you had to that? How did you all handle that?
You know, it's the kind of thing that you don't really see things declared obscene.
Right.
That
Subjective.
whole, yes, and so, you know, what is pornographic and may not be, you know, what we would think of as suitable for wide consumption may not also be obscene. So in that particular case, it certainly pushed the edges of what you would see on the campus, but there wasn't anything that appeared, at least on its face, to be illegal about what they were doing. And if you look at the case law, the Supreme Court has allowed some pretty rough language and some, you know, one in regards to draft protest some years ago. And so the lines on where you can draw that in terms of saying, well, that's too offensive or that's too much is actually pretty wide. And this is one of those cases where they hit kind of a spot where something they were able to do.
So an issue at a number of campuses in Texas in the past year or so has been the appearance of flyers, hate speech flyers that, you know, are sent by outside groups, sometimes outside of the state, sometimes, you know, outside of the university, that are plastered around campus. And of course, that was an issue on the campus at Texas State University. And so there was a lot of student debate and concern about racial tensions. At that time, the University Star published an opinion column that was titled, "Your DNA is an Abomination," that was written, it was written about white people. And there was a lot of backlash, in part, it sounds like, because folks outside of the campus community, talk radio, you know, the certain alternative websites were really pushing this as this is something, you know, this is an example of what goes on university campuses, sort of this ominous thing. Tell us a little bit, Laura, about how that affected the student newspaper. You know, obviously, there might have been acknowledgement on the part of administration that it's a student newspaper and they have the right to do this, but there was some chilling language
Yes.
around, you know, around the things that the president of the university said. I mean, she, you know, in her very first letter addressing it, she said, "While I appreciate that the Star is a forum for students to freely express their opinions, I expect student editors to exercise good judgment in determining the content that they print, called the column Central Theme Abhorrent, contrary to the core values of inclusion and unity, et cetera. What, what kind of effect did that have on the student newspaper?
Well, let me back up and give just a little bit of history. The flyers began happening in full force after Charlottesville. This was August 2017. And we started seeing flyers, white nationalist flyers, papered around campus. Students were finding them, reporting them to campus police. Campus police would take them down before the bulk of students got to campus, and then nothing would happen. We actually had banners hung from Alcac Library, which is in the center of campus, banners hung from a second floor balcony area saying this is a white nation, and nobody was arrested, nobody cited. Police seemed to have no idea who was doing this. And being a Hispanic serving institution, we have a lot of Hispanic students, and they were feeling threatened and uneasy. So one of our students wrote this column, and in the column, he's a philosophy student. He calls for the death of whiteness, and as a social construct. He does not actually call for the death of white people. And that, when I got to campus the next day, so that we go to press on Monday night, our paper's delivered on Tuesday morning. And the way an advisor's role is, I don't read the paper before it goes to press. I will look at things if they want me to, I will give them feedback, but it is not my role to be the person who looks at things before they go out, because as a faculty member and as an employee of the university, I can't do that, and that's just the role of an advisor. So I had not seen this column, and then I come in the next day, I saw it, and I sat down with the editors and said, here's what's probably going to happen, and I would encourage you not to post this online because this is a conversation among our campus community, and if you post it online, this is going to get much bigger. One of our former student body presidents, who was actually a member of TPUSA, screenshotted the column.
Turning Points
Turning Point
USA.
USA. Screenshotted the column and sent it to Turning Point USA that same day. And from there, it started being posted to a lot of different websites. By that evening, my students were receiving death threats. They consulted me on a statement they wanted to put out. Of their own accord, they decided to put out a statement saying that they had made a mistake by running the column, that it was sowing seeds of divisiveness on campus, and that they should have thought more about it before they published it. So that went out that night. The very next day, we start getting death threats and phone calls and things like that from all over the country, because this has been posted on websites and things. I had to have my students' pictures taken off of our website. There's usually photos of them with, these are our editors, because people were screen grabbing those and posting them on Facebook pages as these are our targets. And we were fearful for their safety at that point. Also that day, on Tuesday, is when our university president put out a statement about 3 o'clock that afternoon. And the first line of this is, I am deeply troubled by the racist opinion column that was published in the November 28th, 2017 issue of the University Star. So by our president getting out and making this statement and calling us racist and calling it a racist column, it just seemed to give tacit permission to everybody to start sending us death threats and hate mail. And at this point, I stopped answering my phone and let everything roll to voicemail. And I have all those voicemails still. What that also did is it empowered our student body president to call for defunding the student newspaper. And so he went out and made a concerted effort with other student governments and other members of organizations on campus. They started a petition online to defund the student newspaper as a result of the racist column using the language that the president had already put into play. Alumni and parents were calling. The university president's office is getting phone calls. And then on Thursday of that week, your neighbor InfoWars showed up at our door and broadcast live on Facebook outside of our door, because at that point I had advise my students, you really don't want to go on camera and do an interview because they already are sharing your pictures and I'm worried for your safety. And so they wouldn't go out and do an interview, and they were, InfoWars was just ratcheting up the rhetoric about they won't come out and answer for this and that kind of thing. And so it just kept snowballing. And so we kept getting, and my students were terrified about what was happening. On the other end of this, the university is getting lots of phone calls and lots of pressure. And so I am being called into meetings where I am told, this is exactly why you need to review everything before it goes out. And so administrators are telling me that I need to violate my code of ethics as an advisor, violate the law, and that I should prior review everything before it's published in a student newspaper. And I told them, absolutely, I will not do that. As a result, our students, there was this chilling effect because administrators were contacting my editor directly, and they were telling her, asking her, well, are you going to fire the columnist? Are you going to fire the opinion editor for running this? Who's going to be fired? And they kept asking this, even though the editor, who has full autonomy over her choice of staff, said, no, I'm not firing this person, I'm not firing this person. They kept asking. And they kept pushing. And these are people in positions of power over these students. So when they get questions like that from these powerful offices on campus, there is kind of this implied or else kind of feeling. And, when I would tell this to the administrators, they would, oh, no, we're recommending that you do this. We're just saying it would be nice if you would do this. And that's not the tone that these things were asked in. So we still see that kind of chilling effect that we're having. I still get phone calls. It is now almost a year since this column was published, and we're still getting phone calls by people who discover it online and they want to call and scream at us. Emails too, we still get emails. And, it's known around campus as the column. So every time my students get pushback from administrators, they feel like, oh, this is because of the column. The latest thing is we have some staff members who won't answer questions from us unless we submit written questions via email. And it's odd that 4 different departments have said the same thing and used the same language just this week. But again, they feel like this is all a result of publishing the column. And so that's what we've been dealing with. And in addition to what the students deal with, I as an advisor, it puts me in a difficult position to protect the rights of my students, but also to have, the people who are essentially my bosses telling me, this is, we don't know about this happening here. And, in other markets, advisors have been removed from their positions for standing up for their students. So.
And I think that's a good segue into what Quinicia is going to be talking about in terms of, from the student point of view, how you report a really difficult story that is not going to be loved at all by the campus or the administration. In her case, she broke a story about a former student who said that she had been invited to dinner, drinks, and movies by a really popular Tarleton State professor. It turns out that there were other cases out there, and turns out that there had been complaints that had been filed with the university. They were going through the university process, but the student population at large didn't know about this issue. And Quinicia did quite a bit of reporting on that. I'm sorry I won't be able to get the video up, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to kind of frame this, but I'll just try to give a timeline of events and what happened. So it began with this student, this female who was a former student. She graduated the year before. She notified me and my advisor. She kind of would drop hints that, there was some weird behavior going on, but it was nothing that she didn't just outright say, she didn't outright say what was going on just yet. So this first article was published in February. Leading up to that, like I said, she's kind of dropping hints that there's some weird behavior going on, but she's not quite telling me what is going on. And then I believe it was around January that she told me, this, when he was my professor, the reason why I got out of his class was because he was harassing me. And she was basically telling me that this professor had sexually harassed her. And now, just some background information, and I hope I'm not going all over the place with this. I probably am, sorry. But just some background information. This student was very involved on campus in terms of social justice. So she led Tarleton's only Black Lives Matter protest. It was a silent protest. It went smoothly, but she ran that. She was the president of Tarleton's Black Excellence Association, or not Black Excellence, Tarleton's Minority Student Alliance Association. She was very involved with social justice. This professor is a Civil War historian, so he also at the time was teaching a race and police in America class or something like that. But he was also, very involved in that kind of thing. So they've had a relationship, like a, faculty-student relationship where they really trusted each other. They really confided in each other because, from what I understand, they kind of felt like they had the same values. They were pushing for the same thing. And so she was in this professor's class in 2017. So like spring 2017. And she was in his Race in America class, and she went on a field trip with him and two other students to, I think, Mississippi, and it was for a slavery, basically like a modern slavery conference. And she said that this was when her relationship with the professor started to get a little weird. She told me different accusations that happened, accusations that I cannot prove to this day, but that was kind of the beginning as what she described it. So he's telling her, like, basically flirting with her, telling her, trying to apparently sleep in the same room as her, and then when she said, no, I'm fine, I'm already sleeping with, in the same room as one of the other students, he was like, are you sure? It was just very weird stuff. And then after that trip, she said that I believe it was before spring break, and of course, she had his phone number and he had her phone number, and he texted her and asked her and told her, my wife's away, she's not at home, do you want to come over for dinner, drinks, and movies? And she said she didn't reply for a few hours. She told one of her friends about it and was like, what do I do? And her friend was like, she said that her friend was like, you need to tell him, like, this isn't appropriate at all. And so she told him, Dr. Landis, I'm going to say his name but she told him, Dr. Landis, I'm sorry, but I don't think this is appropriate. I'm your student. I'm in your class right now. And he, from what I remember, he responded, basically like, you're right, but you should still check out this movie or whatever. And so she said, that to her was kind of weird. And I think that was what I could prove because she provided me a screenshot of that. And she told me about that allegation and she told me about some other allegations. And, the hardest part of all of this was figuring out, do we go forth and pursue this story and do we publish this? Because a lot of it we couldn't prove. My advisor and I, we really thought about it. Dan Malone, he's here right now. We really talked about this and thought about it, and we were like, there's just like with a lot of students, there's things that happen with the student. Are they credible? Should we pursue these allegations? Should we publish this? It was a really difficult decision, but this is going to sound corny, but something in me honestly said that you need to publish this. You need to pursue this and you need to get her story out. I don't know what it was. I don't know why. I just felt the need that I absolutely had to, but I definitely had an instinct like that told me, yes, you need to go forth and publish this. And so I decided to, another worry that we had was like, what if this professor's attorney, like what if he sues us, like what if he says this isn't true and he sues us? So that was another worry that we had. And so what I decided to do was I decided to publish what I could prove. And what I could prove was that text message where he asked her out for dinner, drinks, and a movie while his wife wasn't at home. And I decided to publish the story. And that, I mean, the day, I don't know, the day after it was published, I mean, instant reaction, especially from members of the community. The local newspaper in Stephenville is the town where Tarleton is in. The local paper in Stephenville published the article right away. I mean, they published the screenshot. It got a lot of attention with students. And one of the first, what I was immediately getting, or what was I was seeing on social media as soon as we published the story, because we publish our stories to social media as well, and online. And what I was immediately seeing was students saying, "I'm not surprised." You know, it was, "I'm not surprised." Yep, of course. There was a guy that I used to hang out with my freshman year, and he was like, "Hey y'all, I have this professor, and I believe this girl." Like. And, you know, it was just, and for me, that was hard. And I remember just feeling so sad. And to this day, I don't know, like, I don't know why it made me sad, but it's just unsettling to know that so many people could be going through this and, you know, nothing's being done about it. And I was surprised. I didn't realize apparently it was just common knowledge that this professor is like this. And one of the reactions was on Facebook, and it was a girl that shared the article and said, "Thank you, Text News, for sharing." It was something along the lines of, "Thank you, Text News, for sharing this article. I was a student that was also harassed by this professor." And she said, you know, when I was a freshman, she said that he grabbed her, she had a necklace on that like sat, you know, above her breast, and he grabbed the necklace and told her he liked it, and he would ask her out for drinks, and, you know, and she said it made her uncomfortable. And I saw that, and I was like, wow, like, she had never told anyone about this publicly until we published our article, from what I understand. And, you know, I see her friends commenting like, "I'm so sorry," and everyone's saying like, I didn't even know this happened. And that, to me, that's when I realized, like, this is an even bigger issue than I already perceived it to be. And so I decided to reach out to her and tell her, you know, I saw your post, and I'd really love to talk to you about, sorry, I'm probably popping right now a lot, but I told her, you know, I saw your post, and I'd like to reach out to you for an interview, and I want to hear more about your story. And so that's one student, right? And so I'm now, after this comes out, I want to say it was like 6 or 7 other people, women, some of them current students, most of them former students, but they told me same thing happened to me. He would ask me out for drinks. I want to say at least 2 or 3 of the girls, when he asked them out for drinks, they weren't 21. They were underage, and apparently he invited them for drinks or would, you know, push them to drink with him. But after the first article, that's when I had the student who on Facebook said, yes, the same thing happened to me, and then other women were confiding in me. They wanted to be anonymous, but they were saying, you know, similar things happened to me. And what struck me in all of this is one of the anonymous sources, who I actually knew, and I didn't know that. I was surprised to know that, like, this even happened to her. Like, I was very shocked. But what she told me that struck a chord with me was, she said, this is common knowledge. She said when she would tell her friends were like, "Yeah, he's like that all the time." It was such common knowledge, like, within all the students. And so that was the second article that I published with this. In addition to the articles, I also, which I think she tried to show, but it wasn't working, I also created a television news story package about it. There were those 2, and after I published those 2 articles, after this, I believe it was the second article, first or second, I'm not sure, but a girl reached out to me and said, so Renee, the student in the first article, she told me that when she filed a report against this professor, and she said that she was told that 2 other students also filed reports against this professor. And when I published Renee's article, another student, former student, reached out to me and said, I'm one of those students who filed a report, and I've gotten nothing back.
So ultimately, there was an associate VP at the university who said that the behavior was troubling.
Yes.
Highly inappropriate, but they did not have finding of sexual harassment, I guess, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So after I published those two articles, and Renee and the other girl that confided in me, they both told me that they were waiting on the university to tell them what decision they made. And they were told that they would find out that, from what I understand, the decision on what's supposed to happen to this professor kept being pushed back. And I mean, from my perspective, it seems like it's still being pushed back because I still don't know what is really the deal. He's not on campus right now. His stuff is now off of his door. He wasn't on campus last semester either. And I hear through the grapevine like, oh, there's a, this or there's an investigation, but I was told nothing from the university about the situation at all. Even when I tried to find out, okay, is he teaching? Is he fired? What's the deal? I was not getting anything. I was told that there's no updates available. So.
And now this became a bigger issue. The Chronicle of Higher Education did a story about this, as an example of these sorts of issues around the country, and the reaction of his colleagues in the field to that. How did that affect your relationship with university administrators? Obviously it's not the kind of thing that any university wants to have happen or to have out there.
Yeah, to this day right now, I feel like I have a pretty positive relationship with the administrators, and that could be for like different reasons, but I wouldn't say I personally feel a sense of, just wanting to withhold information, because every time I try to, even to now, like I just tried to find out, well, what's happening, and I'm told there's no updates available. But, his stuff was recently taken off of his door, so obviously there is an update. But I would say my relationship with the administration wasn't explicitly, diminished or anything like that, but I would definitely say I definitely feel a sense of they don't want me to publish this story, and they didn't like me publishing this story.
So university newspapers across the country have dealt with at different times that whole issue of how independent is the newspaper really. Liberty University has been in the news recently, where there was an administrator there who was meeting with the editors as they started the semester, basically saying, hey, you should be telling the good news about our university. You're a university publication. You should be telling the good news. So, this is kind of a question for all of you. That fine line that student press walks on a university campus, where often you're funded and your equipment, and of course your location is provided by the university, but there are free speech issues involved there. How independent should the university newspaper be?
Let me take that real quick. So there seems to be this misconception that a campus newspaper should be a function of the PR department, and that is not the case. They are independent students. There are Supreme Court decisions that have upheld their right to publish. Hazelwood limits the rights of high school journalists, but it does not limit the rights of collegiate journalists. And, the misconception I seem to see with a lot of administrators is that, why do your students hate the university? Why do they hate this place? But whenever we publish something that is unflattering. And what I say is, they don't hate this place, they love this place. That is why they are telling these stories, to make this place better. That is their job.
So from the legal point of view, is the student newspaper something you want the administration jumping into?
No, I mean, I agree with Laura. I mean, we understand, acknowledge the independence of the student newspapers. There's a, it's part of the learning process for those young journalists. We recognize the importance of free press today more than ever. And so, no, I mean, I think, as Quenisha indicated, I mean, I think at Tarleton, I'm sure it's fair to say they probably wish that they hadn't been faced with the article about misconduct by the professor, but I'm glad, Tarleton's one of our universities. I'm glad to know that the administration didn't interfere or try to pressure her to not run the story or get in the middle of the story in any way and defer to her, and I think that's the way to handle it. We've got our job to do, and the university newspaper and the advisors have their job to do.
I'm curious, though, sometimes that pressure is not felt by the students, but as Laura mentioned, the advisors. Quenisha, did your advisor feel any pressure?
Yeah, so in this case, yeah, it was one of those things where I feel like the pushback wasn't to me, but it was to my advisor. I hope my advisor is okay with me revealing this. But after these articles were published, my advisor was reprimanded by the dean of the college because he apparently was aware of these allegations, but didn't report them to Title IX. Now, the problem with that would mean that if he were to report them to Title IX, he's revealing sources. So that, I feel like as an advisor, with the role of an advisor, that's out of the question. You can't reveal the sources. He didn't, also from what I understand, I don't believe he knew all of these alleged victims. I think he just was aware of some of the people that I was reporting on. But yeah, those are sources, and most of them were anonymous. So the student, there was only one student who wasn't anonymous, or two students that weren't anonymous in my reporting. The rest were anonymous. So I feel like with them being anonymous sources, that's even more so out of the question. But that pushback was definitely to my advisor, and my advisor was told that I could get in trouble as well because at Texan News, our publication, we are, a lot of us are paid student journalists. I'm a paid student journalist, which means I'm also a university employee, and my advisor was told that I could be reprimanded for not reporting my sources because I'm a paid student employee. And yeah, it's really poppy.
One other thing, Debbie, that I want to point out too is that, in some of these communities like San Marcos, where the university is a huge part of the community, you have a small daily newspaper. And that daily newspaper covers the community at large and, a lot of Texas State, but not everything that happens on campus. So it is left up to these student journalists to do that work and do that heavy lifting and cover these massive government entities and hold them accountable.
So back to the broader issue of free speech and free speech limits on campus. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick did set up a Senate State Affairs, a charge related to this question of our campuses in Texas limiting free speech. Is there legislation to be looked into? There have been a couple of hearings about that. I'm curious to hear, maybe Leo, you can start out. Any idea what might come out of, what sort of legislation might come out of those hearings so far?
I don't really know what may come out of those hearings. I do know that the Attorney General has issued I guess what you might call a primer on free speech and assembly with just, some basic bullet points. I looked over it, it's several pages. It just seemed like pretty base, what we've long accepted as, First Amendment rights, speech right. It wasn't anything that surprised me, and it wasn't anything that was inconsistent with our rules either, so.
Right.
I think what I would say to that is, the law in this area is very well developed. There are a number of Supreme Court cases and other cases from the federal courts that make the rules in this area pretty clear for universities about what we can and can't do in this area. I think the options for the legislature are pretty darn limited. There is that supremacy clause in the Constitution that would limit their playing field. But I think one thing that we have seen in other states already is I think Virginia and Wisconsin, their legislatures have passed laws declaring all of the grounds and exterior areas on campuses to be what's traditional public forum, which would allow non-students and others to use those to protest and engage in expressive activity. We already treat our grounds that way, but UT does not, so it could have an impact on some of the urban campuses when they're trying to protect or impose some limits on the grounds on campus grounds.
Okay. Do you see that, Leo? You think that might?
I think our rules, we've been challenged before, back in, I guess it was 2003 or 2004 with the Justice for All lawsuit that was brought. And it does a good job of describing, if you ever want to just look and see legally what the Fifth Circuit thinks about the campus at UT, that's a good case to look at.
Yeah, why don't you, if you don't mind, just give folks a little bit of background on that for folks that aren't as familiar with it.
Justice for All was a group that was opposed abortion, and they had been invited on campus, and they had at that time what I'll describe as like a road show, and they would come with a big semi, and they would set up these massive screens, and they would display fetus, pictures of fetus, aborted fetuses. And so, as you might imagine, there were some people that were quite upset. And so we had some issues there, and there were certain places we didn't allow them to go or didn't allow them to do what they wanted to do, and so we were sued. And like I say, the litigation was it took a little bit, and most of what they sued us over they eventually dropped or gave up on. But one of the key issues was about anonymity and passing out flyers and things like that. It was really more about the steps and how we had asked for notice of who was handing things out. On the UT campus, we generally reserve and treat it as a public forum for staff, faculty, and students, or invited guests or people that are there as part of a university event, that sort of thing. Obviously, that varies across your campus. Your campus is not one single forum. University of Texas Stadium, Memorial Stadium, for example, we welcome visitors and we sell tickets, and people are free to walk the campus and look around. But that's a very different thing from being able to use our libraries or to take advantage of laboratory facilities we might have. Those are all public things as well, but they have a different use and a different need. So we try to measure what's appropriate across the campus. And so far we've been somewhat successful since that was probably the most turbulent thing. We still do get hate speech and other things that we have to address, but we also have a climate group that constantly looks at and responds to things like that and try to get a sense of how the students and faculty and staff are being impacted as well when we have these kind of incidents. So.
And the hate speech, the flyers, things like that, you can typically address because they're not being brought on campus by students, or because you don't know who they're being brought on campus by?
Yes, and there's several things. And actually, for example, we have particular rules about signs and where you can place signs and where you may not place signs, and who may place them and who may not. So we limit that to university persons. We have particular kiosks that are set up for that. We have other places all around the university. You can always hold a sign, those sorts of things. So, but if you're not a university person and you're not under a proper invitation, or people that do have access to our facilities, I think, like Ray mentioned, we do have a few things that are we call them special use facilities that are more open to the public to use, subject to university use and those sorts of things. But generally speaking, you have to be an invited guest under some university program or student-related program to be an outside person, if you will, to engage in that sort of thing.
So both you and Ray have been in and around this area for quite some time. You know, there is a narrative out there right now that basically says, well, students on campus these days, they don't want to hear an opposing side. They in fact want to limit free speech in some ways. And I'm curious as to what your observation has been with your campuses and whether you have seen some sort of change in what students are looking for.
I mean, I think we encountered that issue with the Spencer event that I spoke about earlier back in December of 2016. And there was, I mean, part of that process was a kind of a communications process and an education process for our faculty, staff, and students. And that is, you know, we agree with you. The message, Spencer's message is offensive, it's abhorrent, we don't agree with it, we don't share it. He's got the right to express it. And we don't have the right to block it. Now, having said that, we also have the right, the university has every right to express its message. So President Young, our communications staff, our advisors all around the campus, faculty leaders, were making it clear to students that that's not what the university stands for. I think student leaders stepped up in that scenario too and made it very clear that's not the values that they share that are shared on our campus. But I think, you know, the message to the students was, you know, not offensive speech is not illegal speech. It's protected by the First Amendment. Matter of fact, you know, there are, you know, quotes, you know, the Supreme Court cases make it very, very clear that that's exactly what the First Amendment is there for, is to protect the rights of people to express ideas that are not shared by the majority of the public. And, you know, there's no legal recourse. The way to respond to hate speech is with speech that counters that message.
And in terms of the student media, are you all, do you feel like students sometimes do not understand the value and the importance of a free press?
Yeah, and I think you brought it up, that I was like nodding my head aggressively. But when you said a lot of times people take when student press reports on things that aren't, I guess, flattering for the university, people assume that the students hate the university. And at my school, we really face that because, you know, our school, we value pride. We value pride in our school. We're a really close-knit community. And one of the things that we've been accused of is, you know, Texas News hates Tarleton. And, you know, people say, like, why do you guys hate the school? And I love what she said because it's so true. I report on what I report on because I love my school. That's why, because I think that the students at my school have a right to know what's going on. I care about my school. So I think that students should know, you know, the good and the bad. We don't just report on the bad. I mean, I'm sure that's like obvious common knowledge. We report on the good and the bad, but we do get that response from people that, you know, why report on that? Why I got an email when I was editor. A guy emailed me, said, why would you put that story about the professor on the front page? There's a bunch of students that just came here, and now this is what they see. We've had flyers, white supremacy flyers on our campus. I reported on that as well. We got pushed back because, you know, this is what students that are coming to tour, this is what they're seeing. But the thing that I say in response to that, a lot of these things are happening on this stuff, sexual misconduct, racism, it happens on all college campuses. It's not just an issue at my school. It's not just an issue at Texas A&M. It's not just an issue at the University of Texas. This stuff happens on all college campuses. And I feel like as a society, if we want to rise above these things, we have to at least address them. And that starts at the student press level. So my response to that is no. We had a hazing scandal. Same thing. It was, why would you report on this? Do you hate your school? No, we don't hate our school. We love our school. I love my school, Tarleton. I'm so glad I chose that school. I want to make that clear. I love my school. And I think in that same breath, I will say, because I love my school, again, my fellow students have the right to know what's going on at the school that we love. So,
Aren't these students fantastic? Yes. I just love the work that they do. But, I mean, I at a previous school that I worked at, they hid our newspapers when they had tours on campus. So my students were upset about that. It's a whole thing. But, I mean, I also want to say that a university, I mean, the Supreme Court says that the First Amendment allows this marketplace of ideas. Where else is that more true than on a university campus, where you should have a marketplace of ideas and an exchange of ideas? Hate speech is not, is protected. Hate speech is protected by the First Amendment, but you're allowed to stand over there and say you disagree with it. So there seems to be this idea among students who are coming to college campuses that they get there, and instead of trying a lot of things to determine what their viewpoints are and who they are, they find the group that is most like who they are already, and they stay with that group. And there is not this exchange of ideas that used to happen when we were at a university. And I think it is unfortunate that that is the situation that we find ourselves in now.
So we got a late start, but I feel like we do have some time for a few questions, right, Kelly?
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, so with mine, I didn't mention this, but I made every effort to reach out to this professor, and I did that for all of the stories. Sometimes I got a response, sometimes I didn't. A lot of the times, the professor would talk to my advisor. He would tell my advisor things that he probably should be telling me, but he would tell my advisor, she shouldn't publish this story. This girl is just mad about the student accusing him is mad about a grade. He responded in the first article. I did have a comment from him through email, and his response, I believe, was that he can't respond, basically. And then in another email, his lawyer told me that after it was recommended that he be fired, his lawyer emailed me back and said, we're confident that the facts of, this situation are going to show that termination isn't warranted. So I did reach out to the professor to get his comment. I included his comment in that first story lower in the story because there wasn't much of a comment. If he had said more, then of course that would have, caused me I would probably put it higher up. But I had it fairly low in this story because he had nothing much to say.
It's funny that you should ask that because last spring at the Texas Intercollegiate Press Association conference, we did a panel where the students and I stood up there and they said, this is what we learned from this situation. And we're actually presenting that in October at the National Collegiate Journalism Conference in Louisville, Kentucky. But a lot of what we learned from that is that context matters. One of the things that the column did not include was a recounting of all the things that led up to this expression of frustration. I mean, it just kind of starts off with this, here's how I feel about whiteness. I've only met 12 decent white people in my life, and it goes on from there. It doesn't reference any of the things that had happened on campus. So we talked about, context matters. There was a lot of debate about whether or not they should have run it, what it did to the campus. Does it further the discussion on campus, or does it hinder the discussion on campus? So one of the things that we did is I sat down with the editors and I said, I want you to really think about what is the role of a student newspaper on a college campus. Does this column and running this column fulfill that role? And that's kind of when they came to the conclusion that maybe this was not the appropriate column to run at this time. And so I think that's just part of our job as advisors, is to say, think about this. Here's what could happen if you do this. And, this is a great opportunity to have that discussion. So that's a good question. I had only been there 4 months. So I feel like they couldn't blame me for all the things that happened, but I also did not let them tell me that I should review everything. There's pretty established precedent on all of this. I had a lot of resources and a lot of people on my side. I also have kept every email and every text message, so if it ever does come to that kind of a conversation, then I feel like there are attorneys in the room who might be able to help me out. But my thinking was just, first and foremost, my obligation is to my students. They're the ones who put their necks out there every day, and they got to know that I have their back. And so we had several discussions, sometimes tearful discussions, when I was just telling them, I'm not going to back down. If you don't want to fire people, that's your decision. And that's how it went.
Are you still fearful that it could lead to that?
I've been called into numerous meetings with administrators. I've had 2 already this semester about content in the STAR. And let me be very clear that the role of an advisor is more of a publisher role. I am not an editor. And the university knows that the students have complete control over editorial content, but I still have to go and have that conversation with the same people over and over again.
Just, if I could, real quickly, Leo or Ray, if the faculty member puts themselves in a position of doing prior review for all of the content, does that increase the liability for the university?
I mean, yeah, I'm probably be out over my skis expressing an opinion on that one. I'll defer to Leo.
All right. Get those skis
Well, I guess
on,
I could
Leo.
just say what he said, but, I guess it would just depend on the context. All of that would matter. I think generally, at least my view at the University of Texas would be consistent with what we've heard. We have a separate student media group and board, and the university has done a lot to try to give them some freedom and some independence. The idea that something controversial published in the Daily Texan, I'm shocked. That's been going around since at least when I hit campus in 1972. I mean, so some of it is your culture and what your campus is used to and kind of what you've been through. And at Texas, we've been through a lot. And so our speech rules have been subjected, I think, as I mentioned, to action. I was kind of interesting and noticed talking about how do other students react and the different voices on campus. We actually have rules about counter-protest and what you can do and when you can do it and all that sort of thing to try to make that a viable but yet separate activity that, much like the A&M Unity Rally, where people, if they disagree with speech, they're going to counter it with other speech, more speech, and sometimes that's even the university.
Right.
So I think by and large, I don't know about, again, increasing liability, because I think that, who knows what people might do,
Yep.
right?
Okay.
But generally, I'd say I think things run pretty well.
Yeah. So one more question, I think, Chris?
We have the Student Press Law Center on speed dial, and Frank Lamont, who's no longer the director, is at Florida, and he and I still talk. But there's a whole lot of things that happen as a result of the calls to defund the STAR. First of all, the way the STAR is funded is we receive $110,000 from student service fees, which is 0.001% of the overall student service fees collected on the university campus. So when they were, using their rhetoric to say, your tax money is paying for the STAR, or your tuition's paying for the STAR, it's like, okay, it's a tiny little bit. The other $100,000 that we are responsible for, we get through ad revenue. And so one of the challenges that student media faces right now, and just so that you're all aware, is we have the same pressures as the industry as a whole. Ad revenue is down. We're looking for other ways to support ourselves. And so that is the next challenge for student media. We do face the challenges of silencing, the students and the editorial content, editorial voices, or they can just wait us out like SMU and wait until we go under financially. There has to be a way that we can support our student media and the important work that we're doing on college campuses. But the defunding argument is more likely, I think, something that's a bigger threat to student media.
I just want to thank all of you guys. You've been fantastic panelists, and also I want to thank you for your commitment to free speech on campus and open government issues. So, thank you.
Thank you.